Night falls upon the lands of Middle-earth as the armies of Angband march to war. Legions of iron-shod orcs flood the rich lands of northern Beleriand, intent on looting and slaughter, and supported by the Uroloki, the dreadful fire drakes of Morgoth, and the entire Angband college football lineup and their cheer squad. Scourges of Gothmog and Trollguard on the field today, looking to slice and dice some filthy knife-ears, see them driven before them, and hear the lamentations of their women. But they do not march alone. Treason has awoken amongst the firstborn, and the curse of Mandos has borne its wretched fruit. What lies or threats brought them on this long march from home, none can say, but thousands of the Philathrom, the elves of the coast, have raised their banners in support of the great enemy. Dark is the hour indeed. Opposing them we have the Easterlings, a combined army of the tribes of Bor and Ulfang, led by the scions of the Great Betrayer, and the bodyguard of Bor the Faithful himself. Chieftain's vanguard and the perfidious sons of Ulfang forming the command corps of this army, supported by hundreds of fanatical tribesmen ready to give their lives for the cause. Hopefully Ulfang and the boys can keep their knives out of the Green Elves' backs long enough to see the orcs and the traitorous Philathrom driven from the field. And speaking of the slippery tree-hugging jackals of the woodlands of Assyrian, supporting the Eastermen we have an army of Lyquendi, issuing forth from their primeval trackless domain beneath the boughs of the land of Seven Rivers. They stand against the darkness as they have done in ages past, in order to thwart the machinations of Melkor, the Fallen One, greatest and most lethal enemy of the Elves and Arda. These sneaky, shooty guerrillas are straight-up nightmare fuel for the slow-moving orcs of Angband, but if they can close the gap and lay hands on the flighty Green Elves, well, then the orcs are going to feast well on elf flesh this evening, as they tear them limb from limb. And so, let's go about the competition here. The first army I have for you today is the Realm of Angband, commanded by Tundrous Fox. He's going to be bringing a solid core of monstrous infantry composed of 2 units of the Troll Guard of Gothmog, who are no doubt eager to suplex some fragile Green Elves straight into the ground. He's also bringing the Scourges of Gothmog, the new legendary company for the Realm of Angband. These are the Torturers of Angband. Any Noldor, or Elves, or men unfortunate enough to be brought to Angband will suffer the tender mercies of these lieutenants of the High Captain of Angband himself, Gothmog, the Lord of Balrogs. Next we have the Uroloki with their unfortunately kind of buggy UV maps, but these are the Fire Drakes of Morgoth. They are fire-spitting mortars, excellent at shredding light infantry, and blobs of troops. Next we've got a couple companies here of the Wolf Riders of Angband, important to have, not only to meet shield and to soak up some of the ammunition from the Green Elf skirmishers who are no doubt on the field today, but they also provide a little bit of mobility for an otherwise very slow, heavy armor-focused Angband army. In behind them we have the Orc Mangonel, excellent for raining down fire upon your enemies, not nearly as useful against the Green Elves as it is for other factions, as the Green Elves are a little bit more fluid than, say, a faction like Fingolfin, who are going to rely more on their formation, or like Finarfin, who are particularly susceptible to the murderous range and devastating armor-piercing damage of the Orc Mangonel. Next up, we have the front line of Tundrous Fox, composed of Reavers of Anfauglith and halberds, or the Ironshod halberds rather, who don't seem to have their armor upgrades, so cheapen out a little bit here, probably to afford the rest of the utility that he has in his army. And then very smack dab in the center of his formation, he's got the Bulldogs of Angband. These guys are Fallen Maiar, forced to inhabit the body of monstrous orc chieftains on the battlefield. They are multiple HP bodyguard units with an armor upgrade, very high melee skill, and murderous damage with their swords. By far the scariest infantry unit that Angband can field, perhaps barring the monstrous infantry that Angband can also put into their competitions. Out front, we got a couple units here of the Thralls of Angband. Not a bad pick against the Green Elves. The Green Elves are quite lightly armored, have a lot of unshielded units. So the Thralls, despite being a lower-end archer unit, they do have the numbers, and they do have just enough damage to really make the Green Elves suffer with their light armor from range. I think that's almost all for the Angband army here, except for 2 units of Spearguard of the Iron Crown, and 1 single company of the Orc Legionnaires. So really just a meat shield. They're probably just here to get in the way, tie down Green Elf skirmishers, tie down some of their mid-range skirmishers as well, and just generally be kind of a nuisance. Next up, we have the Traders Philathrom under the command of Lord of Belagos. He's bringing a solid core here of medium infantry. Got some warriors of Eglarest out front. He's also got the legendary company version of them, the Mariners of Eärendil, who are an important morale buffing unit for the Philathrom, who tend to have a little bit lower base morale, but they do compensate for that somewhat with some really strong morale buffing effects on the Arankir-Lim, the Erain Efedun, and of course the Mariners of Eärendil. Speaking of the Arankir-Lim, you can have them out front here, one of the only truly frightening heavy infantry units that the Philathrom can field. They are a mostly light and medium armored faction. However, the Arankir-Lim are somewhat of an exception to that rule. They are extremely expensive, not super high in number at 113, but still, nonetheless, very much a useful core unit to bring for your Philathrom armies. And over here we've got some Seafarers of Bethombar as well, getting into the light infantry that the Philathrom are so well known for. And in this patch they are particularly fast, basically right across the tier, making them some of the fastest light infantry in the game. Seafarers are mace armed and good for chunking through heavily armored units, such as many of the Easterlings core units that we'll see in just a moment. In the back here we have a catapult, particularly nice for fighting against the Easterlings as they do tend to double up on their halberds, so it is very possible to get a lot of value off of this catapult early on into the game. Second company here of the Arankir-Lim, along with the Erain Efedun, who I believe are going to be the bodyguard here today. We do have a custom model for Círdan, which we will eventually add to the mod, but currently it's just using the sort of generic Noldor model that's been inherited from Third Age 10 or 12 years ago. More Seafarers of Bethombar over here. He's also got a core of 2 units of the Nobles of Baelor. And he's also got a company or 2 of the Marksmen of Baelor out in front. So quite a skirmish-focused army with the addition of these 2 units here of the Rangers of Bethombar. I'm not too sure what the focus is there. I think maybe he's expecting to see a lot of Ulfang units on the field, and so lighter archers and even heavier archers like the Marksmen of Baelor can be particularly useful at gooning them out from range, or against the Ulfang bodyguard, whose name currently escapes me. The Sons of Ulfang, that's it. They can be very, very good against them as well, shredding the unit down to like half strength or something before even one of these units runs out of ammunition, and focus fire can really put the hurt on them as well, and that's a lot of value swept from the field. I believe they also have 2 companies hiding in the back here of the Scouts of Eglarest to kind of round out their force with a little bit of mobility. So, very skirmish focused, not something that you see every day from the Philathrom. Generally you see a lot more of the Mariners and the other new Harassment Javelin units and things like that. But today we're going to be a little bit more skirmish focused, so we'll see how that works out for them. Moving on now across the field, we have the Easterlings, commanded by Safi, who is one of our testers. We've got 2, is it 2? Maybe 3? 3 companies, I believe, of the East Ron Horsemen. Important to note that the Easterlings do not have foot archers, at least not yet, until they receive their legendary company, so this is really all they have in terms of skirmish. Most of these units, very, very lightly armored. They do pack a serious wallop for their tier, and they are quite large for cavalry units, which generally tend to cap out at around 60. So, a lot of damage, a lot of numbers, can be very, very scary when brought in a horde like what you see here, and they have a decent amount of longevity with a solid number of shots per model. Next, we have some Salamandrine Guard, 2 units of. These guys are an interesting unit. They are a strong monster hunting melee hybrid cav. They do have a bow, and it has a morale debuff attached to it that seems a little bit stronger than it actually is, unless there's some sort of compounding effect in the files that I'm not aware of. But they don't have a lot of ammunition, and they don't have a huge amount of damage. They actually do less damage than the Eastron Horsemen. However, you are going to want to bring them for their melee capabilities and their ability to soak up a ton of punishment, especially from ranged, and then after the fact, they are an armor-piercing melee cavalry unit, so it's really not something that you can go wrong with. That being said, they are reasonably expensive, and losing them does hurt when you're playing as the Easterlings. Luckily, they have a big old cloud here of Eastron Horsemen to kind of meat shield for them, so I'm sure we're going to see good things from them in this battle. Moving on to the Easterlings' main line, we've got some Ravagers of Himring here, along with some Warband of Lothland. I believe there's a similar deployment on the other wing. Yes, indeed. Another company here, Falxman. We've got some Despoilers of Caranthir. Unlike the Ravagers of Himring, these guys are not locked morale, but they do have far, far better melee stats and they cause fear, which can be really, really important for trying to negate some of the morale bonuses that the Philathrom in particular get from their bodyguard and elite tier units. Next up, we have some Clan Guard of Lothland here, and I think we're going to see them on the front lines as well. The Clan Guard are scimitars. They really are more of a melee defense, sort of like heavy infantry unit that survives and deals damage simply by continuing to exist on the battlefield. They have a lot of melee defense, not an easy thing to bring down from the front, and they also have 9 armor and a solid shield value of, I think, 7 or 8. So, really good core infantry, not easy to break down. You're going to have to go toe-to-toe with them, although luckily the Philathrom have plenty of tools on their end of the field to chunk through their armor. Backing them up, we have the perfidious sons of Ulfang, the kinsman of the great betrayer himself, who betrayed Maedhros at the Battle of the Nirnaeth Nothiad. Hopefully he can keep it in his pants long enough to get things done. And then behind them we have another company there of the Despoilers, and of course we've got the Albertus of Lothland, very much the heart and soul of an Easterling army. Of course the other units are good, but polearms are super, super strong because of the spear wall formation. That is a massive force multiplier from the front, allowing multiple ranks to attack, and this is high damage, high AP going down the field to anything that touches them from the front. And even if you say you even got berserkers from the Halidin faction, they are going to have a bad time chunking through the halberdiers before taking severe losses themselves. Finally, we have some Chieftain's Honor Guard here. Really, really tanky bodyguard unit dedicated to the faithful Easterling factions. Generally, that's the golden armored guys, while the black armored, more lightly armored troops are from the Ulfang sub-faction. Chieftain's Honor Guard are a little bit atypical in that they wield an axe, unlike the defensive weaponry of, say, the Clan Guard and the Halberdiers. Chieftain's Honor Guard have that axe, which means they get some extra damage off the charge, extra damage in sustained close quarters combat, and of course they will charge at a greater distance. You can also equip them with an armor upgrade in the new test patch, so they're extremely tanky indeed, very much epitomizing the Boar sub-faction's approach to warfare. That's going to do for the Easterlings. Let's pop on over to the other side here and take a look at what Assyrian has brought to the field today. There's some big changes coming down the pipe for Assyrian. No longer are the kinsmen of Denethor the legendary company. They are now a bodyguard tier spearman to give the Green Elves a sort of decent all-round bodyguard pick that you can fit into multiple compositions. The Kinsmen still have slashing damage, they still have really high spear bonuses, but they can now rout. And in addition to that, they're also medium infantry, so they are a little teensy-weensy bit faster than the Urfin, for example. Not the Urfin, rather the Mythern, for example, but they are generally slower than the rest of the Green Elf army. They do also have a Inspire ability now, which means that if you park them in the middle of, say, a formation of Spear Hosts of Rathloriel, then they will hold the line for basically ever. And this is one of the few spear units in the game with their slashing damage that can be relied upon to get a decent kill ratio. Next up, we have the core of the army here, Urfinen Tower. These guys are shock infantry. They do a ton of AP damage off the charge and in sustained as well, but they are very squishy in turn. They've got about 8 armor, which is exceptional for the Green Elf roster, but they don't have a lot of melee defense, so it is very possible to kill them off with even lesser infantry in close quarters, assuming you have enough of them and you're willing to take the damage. Got some Spear Host of Rathloriel here, and on the other wing as well. No, actually that's where the Kinsmen are. And these guys got a nice little buff. Not a huge one, but they got a little bit of a melee defense buff. And the Hunters of Rathloriel are now no longer quite so close to them in terms of melee stats, as these guys now have a shield point up from them. We're coming in at about a 7. So reasonably sturdy, especially when supported with the Kinsmen of Denethor. A solid frontline pick overall, just don't expect them to get a ton of kills. Out on the front lines, we've got 2 units of the Skirmishers of Rathloriel, a melee-focused sort of archer unit, but these guys do not have a ton of ammunition, as they are more concerned with using their shots quickly and then getting themselves into melee. They're also relatively inexpensive at about 700 gold, and you can bring about 4 of them before a price increase, so they make up some pretty good numbers, and they're one of the few more offensive weapon types that the Elves of Assyrian can call upon. In addition to, we've got some Hunters of Rathloriel in the back. I think I've talked a little bit about the changes that have come down the way to certain Javelin units, but I will go over them briefly here as well. The basic idea behind these new Harassment Javelins is that they are low damage, high range, high ammunition. So they can be particularly good at being aggressive pushing front lines, harassing light units, even harassing heavy units from the flank or from the rear. They can be particularly deadly in those sorts of situations. But for Assyrian, they synergize particularly well with the horse archers. And so you can use these guys to sort of form a line that is going to inflict some casualties as enemies try to approach them and pull them out of position, but they're also there to help defend these skirmishers in the event of any sort of melee cavalry attack. But they can also be used, because of their 100 range, to get close enough that you can use them to draw fire for your horse archers, and if they are ignored, they can get in close with archers and deal some pretty heavy damage, even to reasonably heavily armored but unshielded units. In the back here, we've got some Mithrin and Tolgolen. I think we've got one unit of. These guys now are the only Assyrian unit who can actually upgrade their armor, so they're a little bit tankier, which does somewhat offset the relatively low number that they have, but all that armor and extra upgrade value is not going to do anything in the face of a catapult, and it's going to fricassee a handful of those Mithrin there, these elite warriors of the Green Elves, being killed before they can even make it into CQB. Really, really unfortunate. And second company there of the Hunters of Rathloriel. What you're not seeing is that there is a company of Rangers around here. Rangers have been made a little bit more accessible, but they have lost some damage and some close quarter stats as well. But they have ultimately gone down from 1,100 Mirian down to 740. That being said, of course, there's a trade-off: less damage, less stats. But in the back here, you're also going to see a couple of Horse Archers and 2 Outriders of Dweilwyn, who are especially useful units for the Green Elves, as they no longer have high damage javelins. Now the Outriders of Dweilwyn have a particularly important role as being anti-large monster hunters. They've always had this, but now they really are the thing you're going to need to lean into if you're the Green Elves and you want to deal with things like Balrogs or Udoloki in a fairly cost-efficient way. But that is going to do for the armed compositions. Let's go ahead and jump into this battle. Hope you guys enjoy it. And so it begins. So this battle is going to kick off with some volleys here being exchanged from both the Green Elf and the Angband side. The Angband troops are quite well positioned to use the height of the terrain to give themselves a little bit of an extra range boost, which is going to allow them to freely attack the Green Elves, who normally outrange them by quite a lot. Fire raining down from the sky, skirmishers of Rathloriel getting absolutely toasted here. Potentially not the best use of Mangonel ammunition, and it's an odd pick to bring against Assyrian, I have to say, because Assyrian is generally very fluid and they don't form a lot of battle lines. But from the looks of things here, Rex, the Assyrian player, is going to be a little bit more static. He's kind of formed up here. He actually has a layered formation with a front line and then some reserves in the back, and then a general's bodyguard hanging out in the back here, which is really, really good target practice for your artillery. When you have the Mithrin and Tolgolen sitting out here right in the middle of the field, they're basically asking for it. In come those catapult shots, punishing Rex for being stationary with the flighty Green Elves. And ooh, the Mithrin of Tolgolen gonna take it on the chin there, drop from 80 to 67 models. Not fun for them at all. Out in front, skirmishers of Rathloriel, I assume they'd rather be taking the fire shots from Mangonel rather than anything else. Out in front, a little bit of aggression here from the Wolf Riders of Angband, looking to maybe go for some opportunistic charges against the skirmishers of Rathloriel. They are, of course, going to reform, try and pop up some shots in the rear of those Wolf Riders as they retreat, but they are quite heavily armored, so they will stand up to that quite well. And more artillery fire coming in over here against the Easterlings. Pretty painful for factions that do rely on massed formations, especially layered formations, as I explained earlier. But Safi is doing something pretty clever here. So, artillery in Medieval 2, and I think artillery pretty well generally, have more difficulty hitting moving targets than stationary ones. So what he's doing is kind of just dancing back and forth here. Like, he's going to see the volley, he's going to be running in one direction. As soon as the volley goes off and the sort of trajectory has been set for them, he's going to turn around and then try and get under them, which is a really clever way of mitigating that damage. And it hasn't been perfect, of course. You've got a few fried lower and mid-tier units here. Some cooked up Ravagers of Heimring and the Warband of Lothland as well. But at least he's not hitting anything that he cares about. Sons of Wolfang, Halberds, and things like that in the center. Those are going to be imperative for fighting the Philathrom toe-to-toe. The Philathrom also have a lot of strong numbers and mid-range projectiles. So that's something to be afraid of as Easterlings as well. Some alright volleys there, I think. Nope, most of the Chieftain's Autoguard managed to evade that. Halberdiers missed that as well. It seems like yes, especially with the mangonels. Safi is doing an excellent job here at dodging a lot of that incoming fire. If both of them had shot at him and he'd remained stationary, he would have lost very easily 10-12% of his army, perhaps even higher, simply off the approach. So this evasive action here does pay dividends, and is something that I recommend that you use in your own battles in Silmarillion. Meanwhile, up here on the hill, the Green Elves have chosen a beautiful little green hillock to die upon, trying to skirmish with the Thralls of Angband, but only a single company here of the Skirmishers of Rathloriel moving farther into range of the Thralls than they really honestly needed to. Got themselves shot to bits. This is the kind of thing that can happen to you as the Green Elves. They're very skilled archers, but much like, say, the Wood Elves or the Azeride from Warhammer 2 and Warhammer 1, they are extremely vulnerable to counter fire. So, got to be careful about those massed cheap missiles. They can be an absolute nightmare for the Elves of Assyrian. That being said, it is maybe a decent enough trade, as the Skirmishers of Rathloriel are pretty cheap, and they are eating up a lot of ammunition from those Thralls of Angband, which would otherwise be used against units that he probably cares more about. More volleys coming in here, cooking one unlucky son of Ulfang. Another catapult shot coming in. I don't know if it's going to get anybody. Oh, just barely missing. This is probably the luckiest warrior in this Easterling army right here, just barely being completely incinerated by that fireball from the sky. And so far, it's mostly a lot of trading at range with a little bit of attempts at opportunistic aggression from Tundra's Fox and his Angband army. Have some Wolf Riders here moving forward, looking to prey upon this understrength unit of Skirmishers of Rathloriel. They're pretty low at this point. That can be pretty ugly for them if those Wolf Riders manage to get into them. And, oh, the mangonel! And this is why you want to keep moving. Look at the damage. Just one volley there wrought amongst the ranks of the Easterlings, cooking the front line, cooking the General's bodyguard here, the Chieftain's honor guard. Very lucky not to lose his general in that volley. And getting into the despoils of Corinth here as well. Look at that. Toasty Easterlings all over the field today. And that's going to give the blue team a 5% advantage. Over here, Tundra's Fox looking to trade pretty nicely with some of the Urfinen Tower. He managed to get into them before they were able to counter-charge, and so the low melee defense of these units kicks in, and that's not a fun exchange for them, losing about 10 or 12 models or so off that shot. These guys are going to use their fire arrows and try and deal with this mangonel here, but I think it's pretty well out of ammunition at this point. It's firing shots that are really only useful for trebuchets, a little bit of friendly fire there on the Wolf Riders as well. Frontal charge into the Urfinen Tower, again denying them their charge bonus, and trading extremely efficiently, although they stayed in a little bit longer, I think, than they needed to. And the casualties are going to start to rack up against these heavily armored units. Of course, the two-handed axes are armor-piercing, and that is no good for the Angband army. That is bad news bears. Definitely want to avoid that when at all possible. Philathrom now coming over. A little bit of support here. That artillery crew, I think it's killing more of his own units than really anything else, and I think now Tundra's Fox is just going to fully commit this unit and go for a full exchange here. A nice little shot with the artillery and a rear charge there, but this time the Urfinen Tower are going to get their charge bonus off. They're going to melt those wargs. They're going to drop from 15 down to, I think, like 5 or so in just a matter of moments. That will at least blob them up long enough for the Rathombar Rangers over here to take advantage of that. And they're going to be able to cut through about half of this unit of Urfinen Tower. So effectively, he's traded a 600 or so unit for about half or so of a 1210 cost unit. So it's about an equal trade, and the Urfinen Tower are a really important part of Wasirian's offensive infantry lineup. They really do need them in the fight against Angband. So every single one of them lost is a loss that is quite dearly felt. But over here behind the lines, a little bit of action here. Belegost trying to use his cavalry to screen out an approach here from the Easteron horsemen, as well as the Green Elf cavalry. You can see them, I think they're hiding over here somewhere. But there are a lot of horse archers in their back line. They're just trying to give Belegost and his Angband army a bit of a firm pat on the bum and get them to move forward within range of the Falxes and the Halberds of the Easterlings army. Meanwhile, over here, Urfinen Tower have returned to exact a little bit of revenge here, using their fire ammunition on the artillery pieces here. Fire ammunition currently in Silmarillion does do damage to artillery pieces. That is something that will probably change in the future, just so your campaigns aren't completely simple. But for the time being, he's trying to take out this artillery, but they're already out of ammunition, so it's really not worth it. I wouldn't say that that's a particularly good use of the Earthen Towers. Very, very limited, but high damage ammunition. Rangers of Bathombar, going to try and make them pay for it, but they are also being gooned out at range by the Scouts of Gelion here, and they are a very, very formidable unit indeed. They also have a little bit of cover here. That's not going to matter too much as those Rangers are already able to arc their shots quite nimbly over that hillock. And they're getting into the Scouts of Gelion, but oh, the Rangers. They're a much thicker formation, and I think the Scouts of Gelion got a bit of a drop on them, and when you're trying to exchange Rangers for Scouts of Gelion, you definitely want to be able to spread yourself out wide, and you want to be able to get the drop on them if at all possible. But in this kind of exchange, it's going to be very, very difficult for them to get a lot of value, and the Scouts of Gelion are cutting through them pretty swiftly. Over in the back here, you can see another gentle push from the Easterlings, trying to get the Angband army to move forward into their Green Elf allies, or at the very least, just deal a little bit of damage to them. They're going to be firing into the unprotected rear of the Reavers, Bulldogs, Halberds, and all of the important stuff that Angband is going to need moving into the infantry fight. The Scourges of Gothmog as well are particularly vulnerable to this kind of thing, and if Safi sees them, they're going to be a priority target because damn do they hit hard, and they are very, very scary for Green Elf infantry to deal with. This is probably one of the most dangerous units on the field, aside from maybe the Urloki, for the Green Elf roster, which is predominantly spear-based. Scourges will shred them like nobody's business, and their high MD allows them to take very little damage in return, so that's a pretty scary unit, and the red team are going to do well to try and sweep them from the field, or at the very least mitigate the amount of damage that they'll be able to do by cutting down on their numbers. Over here, though, mass fire going into the poor Reavers. I'm not too sure why Tundra's Fox wouldn't turn these units around. You can see that he's definitely noticed it. He's beginning to fire back with his Thralls of Angband, but turning these guys around is an essential part of that equation. They're not really going to be able to be shot easily, I think, by the Green Elves, but that may be kind of what he's thinking, is that if I turn around, then the Green Elves will shoot me, so I might as well just like eat it from these Horse Archers and try and drive them off. Something else he could be doing, be a little bit more proactive here, is using the Troll Guard of Gothmog. Now, there are some Salamandrine Guard nearby. They can be pretty scary off the charge. And I think there's maybe some more Green Elf cavalry kind of lurking in the shadows somewhere, but using these guys would be enough to disrupt them at the very least. Or potentially, depending on how he decides to deploy them, if he were to go over here, he might even be able to funnel them into his allies' scout cavalry over here, and the scouts will certainly finish them off in close quarters. That being said, the Thralls of Angband have done their work, and they've managed to drive back the Eastern Horsemen, but at the same time, now the Angband player is going to feel the need to begin to move forward here. So he's going to bring the Orc Mangonel forward. I think Tundra's Fox is just using this as a little bit of bait, because he wants to make the Green Elf player kind of focus on that, use some ammunition on that. If he's shooting at the Mangonel, then he's not shooting at something he actually cares about. Now let's go ahead, take it into full speed here. Urloki cresting that hill, supporting the legions of Angband as they go forward. Scourges of Gothmog want to definitely be careful here. They're a little bit too far forward. This is something I would have tried to keep in reserve, like maybe hide it inside of another shielded unit. The second company of the Wolf Riders now moving forward as well, but they're looking a little bit worse for wear, down from 50 to just under 30. And that's going to drive the Green Elf skirmish line backwards. And actually, most of them were committed on the front line, so the Angband player is going to have a fairly risk-free approach here as he tries to get in to this Green Elf lineup. Meanwhile, his ally, the Philathrom, are also supporting his advance on the other end. Got to pin the Easterlings in place, but the red team have actually deployed very, very close together, whereas the other guys are a little bit more spread out. You can kind of see the trajectory here. They'll each be kind of picking a 1v1, whereas it looks like to me, based on the deployment of the red team here, that they're looking to support each other a little bit more. Hunters of Rathloriel being brought forward, probably not a good idea just yet. I think they still have ammunition to expend. Skirmishers of Rathloriel being brought forward to sort of block the advance here and stop a charge from going in to the Earthen Tower. You can see the Green Elf Horse Archers as well have come out of the shadows, and they're starting to pick away at the Angband forces from the flank and the rear. Spear Guard are here. They could maybe catch these sentries, but Rex would likely just pull them away. But if he does manage to catch them sleeping, he can pull a lot of that unit in there, maybe kill off half of it routed if Rex is being kind of sleepy. Spear Host here being charged into by Orc Legionaries, the lowest of the low. they're actually not going to do too poorly against the Spearhouse. This is a really cost-effective trade that Angband can make all day, every day. And meanwhile, in the back here, more and more cavalry coming over to support the Green Elf ally and pressure the back of the Angband army. And he's actually brought a much lighter force than what you're going to see in a lot of Angband matchups. And there's not a lot of armor upgrades as well. I assume that he's done that to try and afford more monsters to bring the 2 units of Troll Guard. Hopefully he can get some use out of them. But over here, this is very, very scary indeed. This is a lot of light infantry. This is exactly the sort of thing that Uroloki excel at. And some Kinsmen of Denethor mixed in there as well. But getting shot from behind, they're going to take it on the chin from that 9 damage projectile coming in from the Uroloki with that AoE as well. They're going to blow holes in this light infantry all day, every day, and this is exactly the sort of situation that you want to put your Uroloki in. This is where they can get upwards in the hundreds, 200, 300 kills doing stuff like this, and then afterwards, of course, you have a fairly formidable unit of monsters as well. Look at that. This guy's just getting absolutely cooked here by those Uroloki. The devastation is immense. Over here you can see Hunters of Lothloriel unloading into the Reavers of Untitled, but this is really just a pinning action. And these Reavers are not the killing power. They're just kind of there to make sure everyone stays nice and blommed up, and then the Uroloki can punish them very severely for that. Over here, Scourge of Gothmog have been redeployed, and they're going to move in and fight with some of these skirmishers of Lothloriel. I don't know if Rex is going to see it in time. They might just take a full-on charge here. Yep, he is going to see it. He is going to countercharge. Some of those Scourges will go down there. It'll be a decent exchange, but the Zerfinatar will ultimately end up being overwhelmed. Same with the skirmishers of Lothloriel here. Oh, just more devastating flame batteries being poured into the Easterling reinforcements here as they move to support their ally. But being pinned in place by those Reavers, they're suffering quite heavily. Looks like we've got the Ondohyando and Sarn Athra. This is the new legendary company for Silmarillion, which I don't think we saw because they're probably hiding. But they are an armor-piercing archer unit, but they have a little bit less damage, and they're sort of a slightly higher-end variant of the skirmishers of Lothloriel, so they don't have a lot of melee defense, obviously, but quite light on the ammunition, and their range is actually lower than the regular skirmisher unit, so there are some trade-offs to be had there. Countercharge here from the Halberdiers, looking like they're not actually in the spear wall, which is not a good thing for your Halberds. Some of these Reavers have managed to get in from behind, and the Green Elves look like they're kind of struggling in places here, especially in the center. Eastern Horsemen here obviously have been routed off. Spear Guard doing very well, and those Spear Hosts that we saw scoring off against the Legionaries, they have been dragged down now with the addition of some Spear Guard and some other nasty things. But, oh, goodness. Randir Mentolgalen over on the wing. This is a very dangerous place for a unit like this to be. Now, Belagost setting a little bit of reinforcements over here as well, so the Angband players are going to have to fight just completely on their own. But the Rangers and the Marksmen are a little bit slow in the arriving, and I dare say the damage has already been done. Over here, Wolf Riders of Angband being supported by, I presume, Thralls. Yep, whole bunch of Thralls here. And Salamandrine Guard are actually being beaten back. Normally, this is a fight that the Salamandrine Guard would want to take all day, every day, but not this time. Not with that missile support nearby. Over here, another unit of Salamandrine Guard free to make the Spear Guard here to suffer the tender mercies of their armor-piercing chargers, and they've gone down from 160 to less than 120, so the attrition is starting to take a toll. That being said, the Green Elves are struggling in this. Though over here in the center, they managed to bring it back with the addition of some Urfin and the Ondohyando. I think, yeah, I saw this a little bit earlier. The Bulldogs of Angband were not exactly used effectively. They were just kind of brought forward and left here, whereas they could have been used to move forward and push into the Scouts of Delion line, disrupt that skirmish fire even further. They get a ton of kills in there, and then he'd be able to follow that up with some of his reserve units, Thralls of Angband, as they kind of blob up around a very tanky unit of General's Bodyguard. That could have been a really punishing play, but unfortunately they ended up getting, because they were not used quickly enough, they ended up getting stuck here in close quarters with the Mythrin and Togolan, who are these armed units, and they're going to do really well against the heavy armor of those Bulldogs. Over here, Trolls have just charged into this blob, looking to kick some Green Elves straight off the planet like Lou Gorza, chunking their way through all this medium and light infantry. This is a pretty scary goon squad indeed. Meanwhile, there are also some Uroloki nearby, looking like they've run out of ammunition. But as I mentioned, they are still a force to be reckoned with in close quarters, smacking around these skirmishers of Lothloriel here, sending those filthy knife ears to the halls of Mandos. And if they charge back into this blob, this could be the end for a significant part of the Green Elves' remaining standing forces. Over in the center, though, they are starting to kind of take things back. Albertus of Lothland now have kind of come out of the shadows, and they've been charging into the Angband lineup as well, which has certainly started to swing things back in favor of the Green Elves. Bulldogs here now down to about 14 or 13. I think another one just fell. Really, really struggling here. And the Scouts of Gellion basically been free to fire the whole game. And now these ones are actually out of ammunition. Now, the thing to really note about the Green Elves is that a lot of their killing power comes from units like the Scouts of Gellion. They're kind of innocuous looking. They're like light archers, but they have high damage, high accuracy, and they are not something that you want to ignore. So, pretend that they're not there at your own peril. And I think that's something that the Thunderous Fox failed to do today, was to address the threat coming from that back line. Over here, Salamandrine Guard getting into the Thralls of Angband, exacting some terrible, terrible revenge. Spear Guard here, managing to get into the Salamandrine Guard, the second company of them, and they're basically going to die off in that sort of situation. Over here, finally, some support from the Elves of the Falas. They've moved forward and they've started to shut down the Randirman Togel, and this is one of the few units that you can actually do this with. Melee cavalry are really good at acting as melee reserves, so they're one of the few cavalry units that you don't need to be constantly microing and constantly babying. Of course, you want to make sure they don't get surrounded and that kind of thing, but in this kind of situation, against foot archers and against horse archers and support as well, I mean, it looks pretty tough for the Scouts, but honestly, this is the kind of thing that you can expect them to cut their way out of. Especially with some support here as well. Marksman of Baelar firing in to the Sentries of Gellion. A bit of a risky play, to be perfectly honest, because there is some friendly fire here going into the rear of the Scouts of Easterlings, and they're already a little bit low on numbers. And of course, you don't want to kill any more of your own troops than is absolutely necessary. Over here, Green Elves have managed to win in the center, and they're now converging upon the Angband Goon Squad, who are smashing and crashing their way through the Scouts of Gellion. They're looking to rip and tear until it's done. But with the influx of more Green Elf reinforcements, I think we're going to start to see this Troll Guard begin to fall away. We've actually been separated from the other unit of them, and the Urloki looking a little bit worse for wear. I think they got into a scrap over here with some of these Ravagers of Heimring, and they are light infantry, but two-handed units, and especially Falx units, do very well. There's a ton of bonus versus large units on the field here, and the Urloki unfortunately fell foul of quite a number of them all at the same time. Not a place that you want them to be for sure. Over here, the Elves are starting to take it back. Hondo Hyondo, very, very cut up, but still enough of them left to really make a difference here. The Spearmen are just there to sort of body block for the more important units. The Scouts of Gellion, they are armor piercing. If they can get behind the Trolls or attack them from the flanks where melee defense and shield is not as important, then it can be pretty bad for them. Over here, though, this is interesting. So, the Philathrom have been super dominant in this fight against the Easterlings so far. We haven't seen too much of it, but they were destroying them. Essentially, basically in the center as well, but there was a lot of blobbing, and you can kind of see it here too. Belagos is going to take a unit of Marksman of Baelar here and go for that partial surround. They're going to surround them basically on three sides, but there's a lot of units like this, like Where's Veglarest, who are just kind of not really doing anything. They're there, they're technically in combat and taking fatigue penalties, but they're not actually hitting anybody. So what I would personally do is take that unit, swing it around this side over here to where the Halberdiers of Lothland, this Clan Guard are, and go for that complete surround, break their will, or even go for a rear charge against the Sons of Ulfang, and then free up some important units over here. Got some Aran Kirlim, got some Erain Efadun, really important units for the Philathrom. Obviously, you want them to join the fight and then complete the surround this way. Something else you need to look out for as well, right as Wheelwind charging into the rear of this Marksman of Baelar. If they had turned around, not only would they get their melee defense bonus, but they might also be able to countercharge those Lancers, and that would hit them very hard. It's a great way to get cost-effective exchanges when you're caught at a disadvantage against Lance Cavalry. So I highly recommend that you pay attention to kind of your back lines and what's going on, and go for those exchanges, because it is going to help you in the long run, even if these Marksmen of Baelar were to take a lot of damage in the process. They're certainly going to take less. They lost about a fifth of the remaining unit there from a single charge from about 9 or so of those Lancers, so you really need to pay attention to that, and you really need to do your best to mitigate the damage that they can do. Now, this is significant here as well. So the Philathrom, this is a fight, even with that Lancer charge, that's a fight that they're going to win. They're going to win this all day, every day, because of how important a stat that melee defense is in Silmarillion Total War. So surrounds like this that mitigate or ignore that statistic are huge, and they're going to be able to cut their way through these guys if they were able to get that full surround. But being shot from the rear. The lightly armored and medium armored Philathrom are not going to be happy about that at all. Limb, they're going to do just fine with it. But what I think should be done here is take a unit of lighter infantry, break them off, and at least push the Scouts of Gelion out of position, or at the very least draw their fire away from this blob. Give yourself the time that you need to cut these units down and then go for that full surround, but unfortunately Belegost is not doing that here, and it is costing him. You can already see the Easterlings beginning to pull it back. They've gone from defeat basically being certain early on in the game to kind of balancing things out here a little bit. There's a little bit of support here as well from the Easterling Scouter, Salamander Guard still in the field, still kicking, and they're basically getting free charges here, and Belegost isn't turning around to take advantage of his melee defense bonus, and so that AP is going to go directly onto the armor of units like the Limb, units that the Philathrom at this point in the game cannot afford to lose. So things looking pretty dicey over there. Got some more Angband units kind of piling in. I think the last of the Troll Guard of Gothmog are falling here. There's 2 or 3 of them still left. There's just a pile of Green Elf dead here. The Troll Guard performed very well, but I think they needed a little bit more support. They were used as a goon squad, as you want to. 2 units of Troll Guard stacked on top of, say, a unit of Udurloki is a force to be reckoned with, especially if people blob in. The Troll Guard will body block for the Udurloki, and the Udurloki are dealing area effect damage with every hit, so something to be worried about. But unfortunately, the Udurloki were, I think they got pulled off over here to fight, or to try and finish off a fight that he was already like winning, or was at least trading fairly cost effectively in. But I think the Udurloki should have been used in tandem with the Troll Guard, and the Troll Guard ended up being separated as well. But if all of those things were kind of put together into just one big mailed fist, then that would have been a lot for the Green Elves to deal with. But unfortunately that wasn't the case, although the Udurloki of course got some great value, and there's now some reinforcements coming in. So, blue team successful over here on the Green Elf left wing, and they're now piling in with Marksmen of Balar, or not Marines, the Rangers of Berthalmbar, and some Spear Guard of the Iron Crown as well. These guys are in a bit of a column formation. Would have liked to have seen them sort of put into a proper line and that sort of thing, and then the Rangers of Berthalmbar are going to pile in there as well, but they're going to pop up a little bit here, which is not really what you want to be doing. You want to spread out, you want to use your numbers effectively, and we've seen how important that can be. I lost the game with the Haladin, not only from mismicroing my cavalry, but also because I popped up and didn't use numbers on my infantry as effectively as possible. And that's an important thing to note. Infantry are not like missile units. They're not like monstrous units who can basically just walk into people and always be attacking, or missile units who can all fire their ranged weapon all at the same time. Infantry don't work that way. You can really only do damage to things that you're like in contact with directly. So the wider that you spread out your front, the more damage you're going to be able to do with a unit of infantry. It's going to exponentially increase the amount of DPS that they can do, and we're not really seeing that here. And again, melee defense being a huge stat in this mod, surrounds are extremely powerful. That's something you really want to go for. Rex taking out his Zondo Hondo over here. It looks like the Easterlings general maybe just went down, or possibly the Philathrom one. But Rex pulling out his Zondo Hondo, going for a nice little rear charge here. Again, this is why blobs are no bueno. It's going to set them up, throw them into the rear of these marksmen, and it's going to hurt. This time, though, Belegost is going to see it. He's going to pull those marksmen out, and they're both going to go at each other. I think this is where the Zondo Hondo just get cut down to him. So those marksmen of Balar have a decent enough charge value, and they're going to surround them basically on all ends. And that's going to be it for them. Just look at the difference there. And if they had charged into the back, it would have been like another 10-15 kills. But over when they're charging into the front, it's like 2 or 3 additional kills. So really want to make sure that you're on top of that. Scouts of Gelion firing indiscriminately into the Philathrom, and I think that's really turned the tide here. And the Easterlings will be able to cut their way out of that encirclement. And I think that's going to be GG right there. The fact that the Philathrom are not able to hold on here, and they've lost so many of their units. Over here, Ryan Effidoon finally cleaning up the Sons of Wolfang. I've heard lots of flack go the way of the Sons of Wolfang, but they held some critical Philathrom assets in place here. If these guys had managed to charge into the rear of that blob, it would have been game over for the Easterlings. But because the Sons of Wolfang were able to stand their ground here, and not only that, inflict some pretty serious casualties in return. Most of the Limb, I think, are gone here. Cut down by the by the Sons of Wolfang and that nasty armor piercing, and it's really just the Orion Ethidune who are kind of squaring off against them. And now the rest of the Easterling army has now been freed up, and they're going to swarm against this last bastion of Philathrom power. It's going to hurt. The Elves of the Palace are quite renowned for their ability to hold the line by having lost most of the army, being attacked by fear-causing units from two sides now. Both the Sons of Wolfang, and the Despoilers of Dor Caranthir have the fear trait. They're going to go for a nice charge into the rear here, along with some Lancer charges. And this is basically going to break the Philathrom fighting spirit. That's it for Belegoth's army, except for the reinforcements that it has over on the other end. This is a really important unit's bodyguard unit, and I think this is where he's going to lose his general as well, and that's going to be important moving into the later stages of this battle. Now, over here, reinforcements from the Philathrom and from Angband have stood together, and they've managed to take on the remains of the Green Elves. We're basically down to nothing, and quite fortunate for the Philathrom, they still have cavalry on the field, which I don't think is something that the rest of the red team can boast. Singular Troll Guard of Gothmog being thrown into the Scouts of Gelion here, trying to stop them from shooting, but unfortunately they're going to get off the entire volley there anyway. But it will push them out of position. This one Troll Guard here managing to disrupt this entire unit of Scouts of Gelion. Oof. A charge there from the Outriders of Dwylwyn through their own unit is going to send that Troll Guard into the next world, turning him back into the stones from whence he is built. And the Scouts of Aeglaris trying to goon out these Outriders of Dwylwyn. There's some troops coming in from behind, and I think at this point the Philathrom kind of on their last legs. Those cavalry units are going to get routed off here. This is a bit of a piecemeal attack, really, isn't it? You can see Angband moving forward with a unit of Spear Guard, and the cavalry was out here supporting them, and of course there was that Troll Guard as well, but the rest of their troops just kind of hanging out over here. And I think they're trying to deal with the rest of the Kinsmen of Denethor, understandable. Trying to keep those remaining Green Elf archers busy. But yeah, those kind of piecemeal attacks, it's never going to pay off for you. And now the remains of both sides squaring off here, but I think it's undoubtable that the red team army is the greater moving into this very late stage of the game. But nonetheless, you're going to go for one final glorious charge here. And just kind of sitting back and taking it from the Scouts of Gelion. Not what I personally would have done in this kind of situation, but the Marksmen of Baelor probably are able to stand up to that Earthfire better than just about any other unit in the Philathrom roster. Outriders of Dwylwyn nearly getting routed off there. Unfortunately, the Scouts of Aeglaris too far behind, and Velegost was not able to quickly get in there and prevent that charge from going down into his marksmen, and they are going to pay for it. They're going to go from like 80 to 67, which is pretty significant. 13 models at this point in the game, not something you want to have happen to you. Aeglaris cavalry pursuing them perhaps a little too far here, and they're going to end up losing one of their only mobility units still remaining, which would have been very helpful for screening their advance. No idea why they're not just pushing in here. Instead of they're being a little bit too passive, I think. Yeah, more shots coming in from the Marksmen of Baelor, and Belegost is going to be quite slow when following up the advance of his ally. And they're going to go right for those Scouts of Gelion. Let's go ahead and turn this off here. This is taking way too long. Way too much passivity here on the part of the blue team. Yeah, nice charge there. Scouts of Gelion moving in as well, but we're going to see another surround take place as the rest of that Easterling army extends its grasp to envelop the flank of the remaining blue team forces, and it's going to be the red team that takes this one. So got the cavalry in the back there. The Riders of Dwylwyn fainting a little bit. They don't want to get too close to those Spear Guard. We'll go for it, but they will lose a unit in the process as well, or maybe two even. Fear-causing units coming in from the rear now, and I think we're going to see some mass breaking. Yep, there they go. There goes the Philathrom. They've lost their general, they've lost their army, and their will to fight, and that is going to be all she wrote. Very well done here from the red team. We can see, there's a few mistakes. The trading with the Urfinen Tower with that unit of Angband wargs I don't think was necessarily worth it. In most cases it probably wouldn't be, but they had a huge mobility advantage. They were able to use that to very great effect, thinning out a lot of the Angband troops over here on this end of the hill before they ever made landfall against their own troops. And I think that the blue team was a little bit... We saw some passivity here today. We saw some uncoordinated kind of movements. That's not really something that you can really afford to do. Moving into late stage of the game, the Philathrom did very well to beat the Easterlings, but I think they blobbed up a little too much. They could have finished this fight very quickly and then moved over here to help out their ally against the Green Elves, who was doing pretty well. I mean, he held the Green Elves in place, killed off the majority of their army, even with the Horse Archer support from the Easterlings, which made his job very, very difficult. I think Hunter's Fox did very well. I think if the Philathrom had been a little bit quicker in defeating the Easterlings by using their numbers more effectively, and also by microing their cavalry a little bit better so that the Rangers and other things over on the Angband right wing weren't so scary, didn't have it all their own way. There's at least some mobility there to kind of push them out of position. And ultimately, I think if Hunter's Fox made a mistake, it might have honestly been to throw away the wargs like that. I think the wargs are a unit that a lot of people misunderestimate. Wow, look at me being George Bush. I think they're a unit that a lot of people underestimate, though. Because on their face, they have sort of mediocre stats and they're a little bit expensive. But in a game like this, where mobility was key to defeating the other side, I think having those wargs, those heavily armored wargs who can soak up arrow fire, who can bully horse archers out of position, who can prey upon infantry when the horse archers are pushed back, I think that was a really important part of the Angband army, which was frankly underutilized in this game. We saw at least one good engagement where they were pushing against Salamandrine Guard, and they were supported by Thralls. That's great. That's exactly the way you want to use those wargs. You want to pin things in place, and then try and use other things to support them, or you want to try and bully softer targets so that they can't harass the units that you really do care about, that you are going to rely on to win your battles for you. So, yeah, if I had one criticism of the way that Angband played that would for sure be it, is that their mobility wing was very underutilized and ended up kind of being thrown away, at least that particular unit that we saw. But in any case, my name is Jordan, also known as JMonster. Hope you guys enjoyed this. We'll take a look at some of the casualties here for Hunter's Fox's army. Udaloki getting a buttload of kills. Mangonel not doing too bad for itself either. Trollguard, one of the Trollguard getting 142, the other one getting about half of that with 76. Yeah, fairly decent performance all across the line there. Halberds and Halberdiers, oh, I think that's one of those is a detachment, yeah. Not doing super well for themselves, but we also didn't see them like used in the sort of standard way, and most of the killing power was kind of based on the monsters and the core of monster infantry that Hunter's Fox had brought with him. So in any case, my name is Jordan, also known as JMonster. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.